Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. My name is Carey Nieuwhof. I'm joined today by Savannah Kimberlin from the Barna Group. Welcome, Savannah.
Hi, Carey. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, I'm going to jump in with Francis Chan for this episode and the next one, actually. We had some extended time with Francis from Hong Kong. And man, I'll tell you, things continue to change. We were just talking about before jumping on this call, like lockdowns are increasing now again across U.S. states. What's it like where you are? Are you in California? What city?
I'm not. I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, you are Atlanta based. That's right.
Yeah.
The Barna office is there. So
yeah.
What's it like in Atlanta?
Man, well, things are getting crazy with the Thanksgiving holiday. I know I was wanting to go get tested before seeing family, but the lines to get COVID testing right now, I mean, hours and hours is...
So you're almost like you could quarantine for 14 days before you got a test?
I know.
Almost.
It's almost worth doing that instead of waiting in the long lines. So things are escalating here as well. And it's quite sad because I know a lot of kids are looking forward to wrapping up the school year. But my husband is a teacher and they've just extended offers for all the students to be fully online between now and Christmas if they choose to do so. And that offer was not on the table before Thanksgiving. So I know that in this city, things are starting to get chaotic. What about you, Carey? Where you are?
You know what? We had a really, really good summer in Canada. The virus wasn't quite gone. It was in some areas, but the fall has just been like a steep ascent up a mountain. Like it's crazy, just a big spike. So where I am, an hour north of Toronto, it's not too bad, but like Toronto's in lockdown again. And we've had Mark Sayers on, right? They were in super strict lockdown. They've had two of them. So I think that just leads us into what we're talking about, leading in unprecedented chaos. And I'm going to be checking in with Francis to talk about attendance trends. And I don't know about you, but I talk to a lot of discouraged leaders who are just like, wow, I heard from one today who's been there 27 years. And the attendance is at a 25-year low. Now, I know that's an artificial reading because these are not normal times, but I mean, that has like an impact on the psyche of a leader. And so I know you've got some data. We continue to check in with leaders. We continue to monitor the trends. So Barna just released the 6 questions about the future of hybrid church, hybrid being digital and in-person, like the combination of the two, which a lot of us think is the future. What are some of the indications of continuing attendance patterns that you saw in that report?
Yeah, well, we are all experiencing drops in attendance, right? I mean, how do you even measure attendance these days? And I know that's
exactly. What is attendance? We used to know.
I know. I know that's been really top of mind for all the conversations on this podcast. So I guess it's for some updated numbers from that report. We gathered this data, which was a more robust data set, a really robust data set in September of this year of 2020. And so we looked specifically at practicing Christians, which are the Christians that really are devoted to their faith practice and it's important in their life. So back in 2019, in December of 2019, we saw that of these practicing Christians, 79% said that they attended weekly, which makes sense because these are the Christians who care deeply about their faith practice. These are church
Christians. Of course, you're going to go to church, right? Yeah.
Right. So 79% say that they attended weekly. And then we asked them about their church attendance behaviors during COVID, September of this year. And we allowed them to talk about either digital attendance or in-person attendance, right? That hybrid option. And 51% said that they attended weekly. So that's
dropped, like a 28-point drop.
Yes, from 79 to 51 for these devoted church.
So I'm not the data person. Tell me how significant that is. Like in data world, is that like a big shift?
Yes, I mean it's really remarkable. We've been tracking faith attendance trends over the past 30 years faithfully, and we've never seen a decline like that. Now I know in your conversation with Francis, you're going to unpack it a little bit. Like, really, is this decline the extent of what what the numbers are saying? Is the disruption really to that degree? A 30-point drop? Is that really what we're seeing? However, in regards to the realities of today with attendance, that is what we're seeing. In the decline.
One of the things, because I had a chance to look at the data as well from the report, and I'll bring this to Francis, but If you look at one of the categories is like never go to church, which again, you would expect unchurched people, a certain percentage to answer that. But for the first time, it showed up in church people who are like, yeah, I haven't gone at all, right? Are you starting to see patterns like that since the pandemic hit, they're like, yeah, we're totally out of church, physical or in person. Is that starting to show up statistically?
Oh yeah, one in 5 churched adults is a dropout, is what we unpack in that journal we recently released. Yeah, so of course there are reasons for that, health and anxieties and the elderly population.
Yeah, but that includes digital, right? You're not just measuring. Yeah, so it's like I think everybody can get online, and they're like, nope, not in person, not online.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting group of people, and exploring them is really important. It's important for us to understand these people that have pulled away, because we're probably going to have to win some people back at the end of this.
Win people over and now win people back. It's doubly difficult. There was also some interesting data, and when you say a more robust study, like these ChurchPulse weekly polls we do, the trends have been fairly consistent. It's hundreds of leaders or hundreds of people who get sampled. But when you're saying robust, it's like the classic metrics that statistically reliable polling would use. So that's why it's a deeper dive. Is that the distinction?
Yep, that's correct. So instead of, for the ChurchPulse Weekly, we've really wanted to keep our finger on the pulse of church leaders. Yeah. But for this study, we went to the churchgoers as well, and got a representative sample of the congregants. And
a bigger sample that would, and I mean, one thing that I've been surprised at, even with the ChurchPulse, the weekly data we're pulling, is it's remarkably consistent, regardless of exactly how many samples we get. Okay. But young adults also showed up in this. So there's some generational differences, which we've talked about before on this podcast. What were you seeing in particular with young adults?
Yeah, we wanted to gauge the realities of the disruption that we're all experiencing. So much is disrupted. And so one of the items that we wanted to measure is whether or not people, and especially young people, are if they're rethinking their faith practices. How they feel about faith practice and it being a priority in their life. And a surprising 1 in 5 young churchgoers, so Gen Z and millennials alike, 1 in 5 young adult churchgoers says that right now they are rethinking or drifting from their faith practice, which I think really puts a number to that disruption, not only with attendance, but also with just frame of mind, Do
you know what that means? Like drifting from their faith practice? Does that mean they're rethinking being Christians? Does that mean they're rethinking their affiliation with church?
That's probably a great topic of discussion, because we didn't go any deeper with this question as we were fielding the data. But who knows? I mean, there are probably a lot of different ways to interpret that data point, that people are rethinking things.
I guess how I would see that as a leader is, okay, a year ago, these people were locked in, and now 20% of young adults, that would be millennials and Gen Z, are rethinking whatever they're rethinking. Sure. Anything else? I know we're going to get into mental health and the emotional state of pastors in the second part of our conversation with Francis Chan, but anything else on that before we dive into this week's interview?
Yeah, well, I think as we begin discussing the health of pastors, it's good to just lay a foundation with some data to understand how people are thinking and feeling. And I know, as you said, you plan to get into it more deeply with Francis, but some things that we've been observing is that a lot of pastors are, I think, struggling with confidence right now in their leadership. And that's just a reality that many leaders are facing. We asked pastors in September of this year, again, September 2020, how they think they're doing with engaging congregants digitally. Just how are you doing with keeping up with your people? And only 8% of Protestant pastors said they thought that they were being very effective in those efforts.
In keeping up with people. Wow.
Yeah, digitally and doing that digitally. And so there's a lack of confidence. And we also asked another question that I think is another great foundation just to understand where pastors are right now. We asked how they think their influence has been affected during the pandemic. And 1 in 5 says that they think their influence has diminished in 2020.
Yeah.
for a wide variety of reasons. But there are many leaders who are struggling right now with confidence in their leadership and with feeling like they're doing a good job digitally. And so it's what a moment to speak to those leaders, even on this podcast, and to help them maybe think of ways that they can grow in their confidence and equip them to do so.
Well, I really appreciate this, Savannah, and you'll be back with some more data on mental health for the next episode. But yeah, I want to just say, like, there are no easy answers right now. And anybody who's like, oh, here's your like 5 things you need. I mean, I know I write like that, but it's not like, no, we're just trying to find some light in the darkness and a little, like, hopefully the compass is pointing north and we can, if we're in this together, leadership is hard enough as it is, but when you're alone in it, it makes it even more complicated. And so we're committed on Church Pulse Weekly. And by the way, for those of you who have been longtime listeners, David is on a several month leave, just grieving the death of Jill, being a dad, healing his heart and his soul. And so we're going to be joined by you and other great leaders at Barna. And Barna is alive and well. David sent out a note to everybody. I had a chance to see it in advance and then got it in my inbox very recently. And so Barna's alive and well. This podcast is going to continue, and we're going to continue to bring that. And David will come back. He just needs some time after the passing of his wife. But I really appreciate you and being able to pick your brain on this stuff. So maybe it's time to jump into the conversation. Oh, by the way, before I do that, if people want more, like that report, then go to barnaaccess.com, right?
That's right.
And it's called 6 Questions About the Future of Hybrid Church.
That's right.
Okay, awesome. So with that in mind, I've talked to Francis Chan about house church. We catch up with him in Hong Kong, get a little update. And he has been into a new model for a while. So here's my conversation with the one and only Francis Chan. Well, Francis, thank you so much for joining us for Church Pulse Weekly. It's good to have you for a few episodes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So, Francis, you always seem to be on the move. And I know the last time I caught up with you, you were still in America in San Francisco, but you were ready to move to Hong Kong. And that's exactly what you've done. So for those who maybe are checking in with you, can you, independent of the pandemic, tell us what brought you to Hong Kong and what you and your family are doing there and your sense of call and in getting there, just to catch us up with the continuing story?
Yeah, I mean, my wife and I spent some time in Burma a while, about a year ago, and we're just amazed at how many people had not heard of Jesus. And seeing the fruit of that, we're like, let's just move. This is so exciting. And why don't we move to Hong Kong? Because like 10 years ago, we felt like God was calling us there, and that'll be a base, and we can go to these different places. And but right when we landed, all the travel restrictions started. And so we've been here now for 8 months, which ends up being a total blessing. Because right when I landed, I thought, I don't want to fly around yet. I got to get my family settled. I got to get to know this area, these people. And so it's been a great, great journey. And now it's kind of a weird time because, well, first of all, both of my son-in-laws felt like they were called here to come with us. And so my 2 married daughters had 1 grandchild. Now I have 2. There's 12 of us here in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And yeah. And there's been some issue with the visa lately. And so now we may be getting kicked out. And so, so my 1 son-in-law and daughter and 2 grandkids are going to be leaving on Saturday.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. And yet at the same time, everyone's at peace. But it's a weird time, but it's very good. Very good.
I have in the back of my mind, and maybe this is wrong, were you born in Hong Kong? Is that one of the reasons?
Well, I grew up in Hong Kong.
Oh, you grew up in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
okay.
My mom died. So my parents immigrated in 1966. I was born in 1967, and my mom died giving birth to me. So my dad sent me to Hong Kong to grow up with my grandmother for like 5 years. So both of my parents are from here. yeah, it didn't really, I don't know, maybe subconsciously had some effect on leading me here, but both my wife and I, when we visited 10 years ago, just both independently felt like we heard God say, move here.
Hmm.
So that's kind of why we're here.
And you've been watching what's happening in America. We have listeners from around the world on this podcast, but you've been watching from across the ocean what's happening with the American church, where you just were a year or two ago, and where you spent a lot of your ministry life. And you did a Q Ideas talk with Gabe Lyons that I watched preparing for this. And I remember, I think the question was, pastors are worried about their church. Is their church going to survive? And I want to pull a quote from that if I've got it right. I believe you said, if your church was a diamond and I smashed it with a hammer, what happens? Nothing. If it shatters, it isn't real. Can you, does that sound like something you said, Francis?
Yes, I did say that. And I think that might not be true about the diamond.
Well, let's talk about that.
Because I think people sent me videos like, you're a heretic. You can smash a diamond, it will break. Okay, I didn't know. I was always taught that a diamond was indestructible.
Well, I was with you. I didn't know you couldn't break a diamond either. I thought if you smash, I thought that's an interesting analogy. But okay, so technically, perhaps your future as a gemologist or whatever they call that, a jeweler's limited. But do you agree with the analogy if it was actually scientifically true? Okay.
I do. Okay. If that's true,
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking about what Jesus said about the church.
Yeah.
Right. These are Christ's words. When he's speaking to Peter, it's upon the rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. It's the same thing he says about us as believers. That it's once he started that good work, if it's really him. I mean, based upon my theology, based on my understanding of that, those who leave, like John says, they were not really of us to begin with. So I believe that when God put his Holy Spirit in me, he is so powerful and did such a real inward work. The spirit of him who raised Christ from the dead now dwells in me, that I can't leave him. I'm a slave to what is right. Now I understand there are some passages that are difficult to interpret, where you go, gosh, here it might look like you could lose it here. But in general, still, best I can understand scripture is, if you are real today and the Holy Spirit of God resides in you, there's a sense in which you're indestructible. We don't go down like that. And same with the church. The idea is, gosh, do you understand? Like, we're the temple of the living God. Like, nothing can separate us from him. And so when we talk about the church seems to be falling apart or losing its members or whatever else, I kind of question that theologically. And I understand fewer people are attending these services, but does that mean the church is in bad shape, or that the church is dying out? Or is it just that it's a pruning time?
Well, and you've had your own relationship journey through the American church as well, right? When you were in Simi Valley and your church exploded, became one of the fastest growing, best known, very large mega church. And then you went to San Francisco and did some house church stuff. What did you learn? I'm going back to seminary, and I can't remember who said this, whether it was Niebuhr or whoever, but the church visible versus the church invisible. There's the church we see, the church Christ sees. That probably didn't start with one of those theologians. But I'm just wondering, what did you learn, like, as you built a very large church? Because you and I've had conversations before in other forums where you're like, yeah, I learned some stuff along the way, and people were putting pressure on you, and you're like, yeah, that's why I wanted a radically different model of church moving forward. Like, do you feel like you've been through a round or two of this in your life already before there was a pandemic?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of cool because in Hong Kong, we've got these house gatherings established now. Just in a few months, we have but we're about to split into 4 churches, and it's been great. It's everything we're doing in San Francisco, and the pandemic really doesn't affect us as a church. In fact, it makes us closer. One of the things I'm hearing from a lot of people is that their families are getting a lot closer during the pandemic. Family relationships are good. Church relationships are kind of disappearing. And I'm going, but if the church was supposed to be a family, why is it that our relationships in the church are getting more and more distant? And yet our family relationships are getting better? Because I don't know, in our gatherings, in our churches, it just seems like, wow, this has really pulled us together, gotten us closer to one another, realizing, wow, we really need each other for the future of wherever this world is going. I learned a lot in San Francisco when we started doing those things, some of the difficulties that I'm able to think through and maybe reapply out here.
How have you gone about starting a church in Hong Kong? Because literally you've been there less than a year. So what have been some of the things that you've done to now see it multiply 4x?
Yeah, first it was just my family, which it's a big family, so it feels like a church, the 12 of us. Just getting over here, it's like, okay, what do we do? Let's just worship. Let's just gather and pray and worship and get in the word, everything we know. Let's break bread together. And then as we get to know people that either give their life to the Lord or they don't have a home church, let's invite them and disciple them. And so people just started coming, and and then training up some leaders, dividing. And now with the potential of us leaving, it's kind of forced us to really push on making leaders so that if we left in a couple of weeks, it would be fine.
Oh, you may also end up going back to the US, perhaps?
Yeah. Actually, I have to go to immigration today and talk to the officer. So it's kind of,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So hopefully we can work something out because we're not ready to leave, but we're also totally at peace wherever God sends us next.
Wow, but that's interesting to only be there a few months and perhaps leave the beginnings of a church planted and embedded in Hong Kong. That's pretty cool.
Which we weren't expecting, but I remember me and my son-in-laws were headed to immigration like a month ago going, wow, they may kick us out right now. Are we ready? Is the church ready? We didn't even think this way. Then we go, if we only have a month left, let's get it. Paul only stayed in certain places for a few months. And then he moved on and he established leaders. And so we know it's doable. And so let's see what we can do. And it's just been really cool seeing the way God blessed. It could be his plan to kind of push us along faster than we expected.
So what have you done in the last 30 days to get people ready, just in case?
Yeah, we just kind of handpicked in our minds. We just thought, okay, here's 4 guys that we feel most strongly about, and let's just approach them and tell them, hey, there's a good chance we're leaving. Well, what do you think? And of course they all freak out, but we just kind of tell them, look, this is pretty normal in the New Testament, and you are pretty powerful with the Holy Spirit in you, the things you are capable of, and reminding people what we're talking about. When you read the Bible, look at the things that God has done through people. It's outrageous. We're talking about getting believers together to worship him. Okay, that doesn't seem like rocket science compared to what he's done. Like, have we really gone so far that it would just take this supernatural act of God? Come on, you guys, look at what he's done through the lives of normal human beings. He's in you. We've got this. And so it's kind of that type of coaching and just kind of think, speaking to them of where do you feel weak? what do you feel like we could help you with while we're still here? And again, there's the possibility that I'll get a visa and everything will be fine and I'll be here for, I don't know, as long as the Lord wants me. But yeah, so that's kind of just our mindset, and it's been good for us.
What have you done? Because you had years in San Francisco doing this sort of home-based church movement, and then you've had months now in Hong Kong. What have you done differently in Hong Kong? And I know it's only months in, but like, what are some lessons you learned in San Francisco that you're like, yeah, not going to do that again? And then others that you were like, totally going to do this again. What were some of the learnings?
Yeah, I think I was still stuck, even though I knew in my head, like, don't just go after gifted people, to be
Right.
leaders. Like, you've got to look for extreme humility. Like, humility is key. Pride will destroy the church. I don't care how much he knows. I don't care how good he is, Does he know Jesus deeply? That it's created this humility of understanding who he is before God. And so I've made some of those mistakes again in San Francisco, where you're just like, oh, this guy is so much charisma and everything else, and you want to see the church grow. So it's like, okay, yeah, let's let it. And versus the other guys where you go, gosh, he doesn't have the natural charisma, and leadership ability. But wow, he seems to really love the Lord and know him. And those are the people where we saw the success and just a real love for their people, and even saw God multiply their churches versus the gifted ones that outwardly that a secular guy would pick for his company or something. Like, and not to say they can't be both.
Yeah.
The main thing is leadership, and going, okay, let's look for those key things this time, and let's center around that, because it seems like that's what Jesus was after. That seems like what an elder is supposed to be. And so that was one of the big things, takeaways from my time in San Francisco. And then the other thing was just, I think sometimes we can get comfortable in any model. And so to keep the people living by faith and believing in themselves, rather than settling in, because we tend to take steps of faith. And then once we've done it, it's like we want to, okay, we did it. Now let's settle in. I'm kind of happy with my house church. So some of them stopped multiplying.
Got the model. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in San Francisco, I was so intent on not being the center of the church that I began to do nothing and go, no, you need to go, you need to do it. And I think now realizing, no, there's a gift of keeping those leaders multiplied. There is a teaching gift that needs to be used appropriately and not overused. And so trying to find that balance over here.
Boy, this could go in 5 different directions. Let me go back to humility. And this is going to sound like a really simple question, but I mean it in all sincerity. How do you know whether that leader has that quality of humility that you think qualifies them for leadership? What do you look for?
I think it's, like in Philippians 2, when he tells us to take on that mindset of Christ, it's just about considering others more important than yourself. It doesn't take long to see that in a person, where they show up at a gathering and they really are thinking about other people and loving other people. And you see them naturally gravitate towards people that maybe feel lost or whatever. And I mean, it's a huge sign of humility to walk in a room and to care for people rather than just trying to make yourself comfortable. The stories, the lifestyle, it's just they're thinking of others and not of themselves. And then there's others that seem to be the hero of all of their own stories. And you just go, okay, it's pretty quick to spot. I think there's just it's like that old adage, it's like a guy with bad breath. Like everyone knows it except him.
Except him, yeah.
You know, and that's what the proud man is. It's like, gosh, everyone in the room is kind of looking at each other, and or you know, you look around, you go, okay, I think everyone notices what's going on in here, except this person. So how do I love them? How do I bring them along? How do I confront this and tell them? But it seems pretty obvious to most of us.
Yeah. I appreciate how you said, you try to avoid that. You try to look for humility, but you fall into the same trap, from time to time. Why do you think that trap is so seductive, Francis? Why do you think that sometimes, despite our best intentions, we keep falling for it?
Well, we like to accomplish things. It's like growing a company, right? And how am I going to grow this company? And so I get stuck in looking at the church in that way sometimes, because that's the model I grew up in, was just grow it. And so you're just trying to get all these people here. So you hire the best youth pastor, the best worship guy, the best this, that, bring them in. That's just the way we were raised. That was the model. And so to retrain our mind and go, gosh, biblically, what did Jesus look for? And how did he do it? So we just keep slipping back, and that certain people will immediately bring success in our old view of success. And so, and you justify going, well, God would want a lot of people coming to, and he understands, and we have to be good stewards, and we just start taking.
That's a phrase I want banned in the future. It's like, it never leads anywhere good. We have to be good stewards. You're either being cheap or I don't know, but it almost never leads where you think it will. Yeah. Francis, that's so honest. So one of the data points that we have been tracking here on ChurchPulse Weekly is with church attendance. And I really appreciate framing, your experience in San Francisco and Hong Kong with your new model of church. But according to a Barna poll, 53% of U.S. adults have not been to church, digital or in person, since the pandemic started. The usual number is 14%. So that's almost a 40-point increase of people who are just, nope, church is off my radar. In addition, 19% of practicing Christians have completely skipped church, digital or in person. And the previous statistic was 0%. So suddenly, a church adult is like, of course I go to church. Now 19% don't since coronavirus. Any sense of what might be going on? And I think you not being in the country might even have a fresher perspective.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think there's several factors. There's the elderly primary. I mean, we got to remember, like in the US, a lot of the churches are still these old, holding on, gray-haired congregations singing hymns, and that's a beautiful thing. But for them to transition to Zoom, I mean, picture yourself, leading a congregation of 70-year-olds, and hey, we're gonna go to Zoom. Like, why's that? It's just the whole, like, are they even creating Zoom, for the elderly? And it would just be such a tough transition for them. So I'm guessing some of the numbers is that.
Yeah, that's true.
And, at the same time, when you said those numbers, okay, there were two like conflicting thoughts that went through my mind and my heart. One is I immediately felt like a sadness, like, in the heart of God, like looking down, and here's all these people worshiping me. Okay, now it's cut in half. Like, boom. Okay, so there's that. Like, my first inclination was like, oh. But then my second inclination is thinking about what he says to the priests in Malachi's day. Like, would you guys just shut the doors to that place? You're just, you're giving me these offerings I don't even want. You're giving me this half-hearted stuff. I don't even want that. And I'm a great God, and I demand worship, and I will be worshiped. And he's like, don't give me your leftovers. And so there's this other side where I go, gosh, maybe maybe God does love this. It's like, okay, let's just prune off all of that isn't genuine anyways. And let's gather the people who really in their heart have truly chosen to follow me. and truly understand what this church is supposed to be. And let's have that worship that is pure. And I don't know. So it's like, on the one hand, I think in my flesh, I go, oh man, where did those people go? But then spiritually, and looking at the pattern of scripture, I mean, Christ has always just been interested in the true followers and the ones whose faith is going to survive anything, because their faith really is born of the Holy Spirit. And some of that other, like the John 15, it's like pruning off those branches that really don't bear any fruit anyway,
Yeah.
that are sucking all the life out of the vine. It's kind of wasted energy, and this is going to make it more fruitful, is if we get down to what's real and what's produced fruit.
So, for years now, you've been experimenting with different models of church. And I think one of the consensuses, if that's a word, that has emerged, at least over this first year of crisis, which still does not show any sign of resolving itself. So we could be in this situation for months, if not another year. Nobody really knows. But one day there will be a vaccine. One day, we'll be able to freely assemble, though. But almost everyone we talk to, Francis, would say that they see this as a disruption, not an interruption. Any thoughts on that? Do you think this is a disruptive moment in human history and church history, or just an interruption? It'll be back to normal.
Wow, I sure hope it's a disruption. I mean, in several ways. I mean, one, because depending on your eschatology, it's like this could be the end, and this could be so there's an excitement of, scripture says, when all these things happen, just lift up your head, your redemption is near. It's like, oh, is this it? Is this the end? This could be so cool. Like, and I'm going to be on the earth, and I'm going to get to see it, and I get to come into his presence. Like, so there's an excitement of, is this a disruption? Is this a changing of times, and the Lord is giving us this one last push and go for it? If it's just an interruption and we go back, gosh, that would be really, really disappointing, sad, because we would go back to a lesser form of what we had. And I feel like what we had wasn't great. And I think this disruption or interruption showed that. I mean, look at how incompetent and lost people feel. Like, gosh, what do I do with my kids? I need can we start something for my children on Zoom? It's like, well, biblically, like, we were supposed to train you up so you can raise your own kids and share with your friends and make disciples. But what we were doing wasn't producing that. So to return to a lesser form of that, wow, we're almost just like digging our own graves. So I'm praying that this really is a disruption that changes the trajectory of the church, where we realize something like this could happen tomorrow. Even if the vaccine works, you really think this is going to be the last illness? And with all these talks of chemical warfare and everything else, like, we have to prepare our people for anything. Anything can happen. I mean, the world is so volatile right now with the warring countries. I mean, it just takes one act or one decision, and I think about in the US, who knows how many freedoms you're going to have. And especially here in Hong Kong, it's just, we don't know what the future is, but we shouldn't be worried about it. We should be prepared for it so that we don't have to worry. We're believers who I can survive anywhere. I know how to get in the Word. I know how to make disciples. I know how to raise up my family. I'm good. And so, let's use this time. If we do get another little break, use it to prepare the church.
What would your hopes be for church leaders as they prepare for, this crisis? There will be some form of new normal, much overused phrase, but at some point things will be more stable than they are now, perhaps temporarily. And they're thinking about the new era that they're going to be doing ministry in. What are a couple of things you would say to every leader My goodness, when you're redesigning things, please pay attention to this. What advice would you give them?
Yeah. Wow. I think it's a great opportunity to go back to like what brought you to go into ministry in the first place. Remember that, like, we can lose sight of the faith we once had. I mean, the older we get, the harder it is to live by faith because you know more and you know what could go wrong and you know you also have more responsibilities. Some of us have multiple kids, grandkids, and we're trying to we feel responsible for all of these things, and then you start making decisions based upon some of those fears of, well, I got to figure out enough money to live off of, and how do I keep my salary, my house payment, live in this community, this, that. And gosh, remember when we first believed, those weren't our concerns, and we're concerned about eternal things. We really thought about heaven and hell. We thought, wow, I could make a difference. And I think, anyways, at least that was for me. But a lot of these pressures come up and expectations, and pretty soon we're just trying to meet people's expectations. And I would say look biblically, and number one, back to your love relationship with Jesus. Man, I sure hope you're closer to him and feel a security in his provision for you if you seek the kingdom first. But if you're going to seek your own well-being and security, which it's easy to kind of sway into that. That's why one of the things my wife and I try to do is always keep our life so simple that there's no pressure for a lot. Like, I go wait tables and we're happy with a bowl of rice at night and, some noodles and some beans or whatever. And as long as we're okay with that, then I can pursue whatever and, keep our family lean, simple, so that I don't feel that financial pressure. Because a lot of decisions are made based upon finances.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's like, okay, let me get that first. Then what can I do under the parameters of whatever, 60,000, a year? Then I'll figure out what can God do under those parameters, rather than saying, God, you know what? I'm gonna simplify my life best I can understand. So now sky's the limit. What do you want me to do? If I had that type of freedom, how can I love these people best? And I would say, think through that idea of success. I mean, and be honest with yourself. We do get caught up in numbers. I hated empty chairs. Every Sunday, if there are if there's an empty row, it's like, oh my gosh, and then several, some weeks, people were on vacation, so I noticed these things. It hit me that the income, the offerings going down, and you just realize, oh God, help me out of this. Why do I look at this so much? Success is about how many people have I truly equipped and sent out. Not how many people do I gather in this room. And so, man, if there's fewer and fewer because I equipped them and sent them out, I have to look at them as my own children. Like the goal is equipping them and sending them out. It's not just having them more inside of my house. And so it's like, do I really believe that? Do I really take that Ephesians 4 that literally, that I'm equipping them for the work of service, or am I just gathering them to listen to me? So it's just a great time to go back biblically and go, God, what are you doing right now? Are you even taking away that option? He certainly has in the last year, but is he doing that indefinitely? And it sure seems like there's going to come a time when that happens.
Final question for this round. And we've got another round. You and I are going to talk about mental health and dealing with critics and the whole deal. How did you wean yourself off of the addiction or the repulsion of empty seats? Like when you look out and you just read the mail of most pastors and they look out there and now they're dealing with 36% average attendance return to church, right? There's a canyon of empty seats. How do you wean yourself off of that addiction to a full house?
Wow. I think, I wrote about this
Yeah.
15 years ago, whenever in Crazy Love, just when I looked at my wife and said, if Jesus had a church in our city, I think mine would be bigger. If the Apostle Paul started a church in our city, I think mine would be bigger. Um, that I don't call them to the same commitment Jesus called his followers to. And I don't call people like Paul did. And the lifestyle that he called them to, I really believe that genuinely I'd have more people. And I didn't have peace about that because I'm going, wow, all these people that are in my gatherings would not have followed Jesus. Um, he would have led them to a point of decision where it cost them something and it would have cost too much at some point. And so for me, while there's the flesh that loves the giant crowd and um, the energy in that room, there was also a lack of peace. Like, this looks so different from what I see in the New Testament. So switching, while it took away the fleshly enjoyment of the crowd, and that was hard to wean off, it brought this piece of, wow, this feels like the New Testament. This seems like that love that he calls for. If we go down this route, I got to believe this is going to work. And so it's kind of like this trade-off, which that peace before God is always going to win out. So it's not just losing something. And I think that's where it's like the weaning off is like, no, we're gaining something on this other side where you're going, oh, I have a lot more peace about this. Wow, we're really getting into people's lives and this is tough. Even the suffering, it's like, okay, I think this is the type of suffering he was talking about. And I don't know, that trade-off of feeling right before God and feeling like this is more congruent with what I read in the New Testament. The trade-off is what would help me through what I missed.
Francis, thank you so much. Looking forward to round 2. Well, that was part 1 of my conversation with Francis Chan. Stay tuned for part 2. It's going to be a fascinating dialogue. And next time we are going to focus on mental health. How do you handle the critics? How do you handle the division? How do you get through a prolonged crisis? And Francis has been through his share. And of course, obviously, as you've heard, he's even found peace in the midst of trying to figure out where he's going to live and what he's going to do and all that stuff. So stay tuned next time at Church Pulse Weekly. You can learn more at barnaaccess.com. That's where you can find some videos, the video version of this. I know most of you listen via podcast. If this episode has helped you, do us a favor, like subscribe, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please do tell your friends about it. Feel free to share this on social when we see you doing that. Tag us. Let us know. I'm Carey Nieuwhof on Instagram and C. Nieuwhof on Twitter and Facebook. And we will definitely get that out to as many people as possible. Hey, leaders, we're behind you 100%. Even though David is taking a sabbatical, some time off just to heal and grieve and be with his family after the passing of his wife, we're going to continue on here. Going to bring you some of the top leaders, practitioners, thinkers in the area of how do you lead in this prolonged and some days escalating crisis. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening.